is on. The first votes are already being cast, and the candidates are here answering your questions. Stauber, Nystrom, live in the WDIO studio. Only one will head to Washington to represent northern Minnesota. Your voice, your vote. Minnesota's 8th Congressional District Debate, presented by WDIO. Here are your debate moderators, Darren Danielson and Bailey Warfield.
Good evening and welcome to one of the last debates for Minnesota's 8th Congressional District. I'm Darren Danielson.
And I'm Bailey Warfield. Over the next hour, you will hear from the two candidates hoping to represent northern Minnesota in our nation's capital.
Now, our hope is to shed some light on a number of important issues affecting the Northland through an informative and civil debate.
Yeah, Minnesota's 8th Congressional District covers the northeastern part of the state. It includes Duluth, the Iron Range, and up to the Boundary Waters Canoe area. The district is currently represented by Republican Congressman Pete Stauber. Mr. Stauber was born in Duluth. He is a retired Duluth police officer and a former member of the St. Louis County Board of Commissioners. Mr. Stauber was first elected to Congress 2 years ago. Challenging him is Democrat Quinn Nystrom in her first run for Congress. Ms. Nystrom lives in Crow Wing County. She is a former member of the Baxter City Council and is an advocate for lower prescription drug prices.
And we want to thank Mr. Stauber and Ms. Nystrom for participating in tonight's debate. Thank you both. Voters will also see a third-party candidate, Judith Schwartzbacher of the Grassroots Legalized Marijuana Party, on the November ballot. Tonight's debate is being conducted with some enhanced pandemic precautions. You will not see the candidates shake hands before or after. We've also placed the candidates and moderators more than 6 feet apart, and we put up a panel of plexiglass to provide even extra protection. Now, both candidates have agreed to tonight's ground rules. They will each give an opening statement, then they'll each have 1 minute to respond to questions posed by WDIO News and from our viewers. Now, at the end of the debate, each candidate will also have a chance to give a closing statement. The candidates have agreed to stick to the time limits and not to interrupt each other. We will cut off the candidates' microphones if they talk over each other. It is our goal to provide an informative debate that allows you, our viewers, a chance to understand and hear the candidates' positions on these important issues. The order for tonight's debate was determined by a random draw, and we begin with a 1 minute opening statement from the incumbent, Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much, Darren and Bailey, for hosting this in WDIO, and for Quinn for participating in this in-person debate. You know, I'm very blessed. I married my best friend. My wife and I have 4 beautiful children, one with special needs. My life has compelled me to public service. I spent 23 years as a police officer, 22 of them right here in the city of Duluth. My brothers and I are entering our 31st year of small business ownership in Duluth. I'm a former professional hockey player, and we are a military family, and I am proud of my wife's service to this nation. I was born and raised right here in the 8th District. Like many of you, I hunt, I fish, I recreate, I hike, I bike, I camp. So I'm not only fighting for our way of life, I'm living it. And I look forward to this debate tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stauber. Ms. Nystrom, you have 1 minute for your opening statement.
Well, thank you so much to our moderators and everybody here at WDIO for hosting this debate with Congressman Stauber and myself. You know, I grew up in Baxter, Minnesota. I'm a 4th generation of Crow Wing County. I'm a small business owner, and I first ran for public office with the Baxter City Council because I believed that we needed more diverse voices in government. My background is as a healthcare advocate. After my younger brother and I were both diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at young ages. It's important to me that we fight for affordable and accessible health care. That's what brought me to my run for Congress. I met with Congressman Stauber last spring in DC to ask him if he would fight with us to make our lives better and make them more manageable. Unfortunately, he didn't follow through on those promises, and that's why I decided to run for Congress, so that we had a stronger voice representing the people of this great district.
All right, thank you, Ms. Nystrom. Well, we begin our questioning now tonight with the issue that, of course, has gripped our entire nation since March, the COVID-19 pandemic. Here in the Northland, we are seeing the number of infections continue to grow. The state health department says that more than 124,000 people have tested positive here, and of those, more than 2,000 Minnesotans have died from the disease. COVID-19 is expected to impact our lives well into 2021. So the question, what steps do you think need to be taken to safely reopen the economy while protecting the health of the most vulnerable? We begin with you, Mr. Stauber. You have 1 minute.
Well, thanks for that question. You know, every death from COVID-19 is a tragedy. And we know now more about this disease than we did 8 months ago. We know that predominantly our seniors with underlying health conditions succumb to the disease. So we need to put all our efforts and follow CDC guidelines in protecting our seniors in our long-term health care facilities, in our nursing homes, etc. But make no mistake about it, we can keep people safe and open up our economy. In fact, the World Health Organization just stated that we didn't need to shut down our economy. And in fact, we should have gone with the parallel paths that we're going right now. Opening up our economy in a safe and responsible way, and making sure that we take care of those that are in most of need during this pandemic. The bottom line is, as we go through this, I believe we are going to be, when we get through it, we're going to be a stronger, more self-reliant nation than we've ever been before.
Ms. Nystrom, you have 1 minute for your answer, please.
So I just saw on the news today that Minnesota has now had the 10th consecutive day of over 1,000 diagnoses of COVID-19 right here in Minnesota. Unfortunately, it doesn't see that this pandemic is slowing down anytime soon as we enter our colder weather months. We absolutely need to have a much stronger federal strategy in place to make sure that we are doing it on all angles to combat this pandemic. That includes, we need more PPEs. I talked to nurses this morning who at their hospital here in the 8th have double locks just for them to access PPEs. That shouldn't be happening. We need more testing. We need rapid testing. People should not be waiting 5 to 7 days to see their results. We also need antibody tracing, and we absolutely need to find a safe vaccine, and once that becomes available, that it's affordable and accessible to everybody. And we also must lead with leadership and have people wearing masks, which the CDC director has said.
All right, thank you. Well, moving on now, the U.S. debt continues to grow. Right now, it's estimated at a staggering $3 trillion. Most economists believe some additional spending is needed in the short term to counter the ongoing impact to the U.S. economy from the pandemic. But this level of spending isn't sustainable. What does Congress need to do to reduce our federal debt? Ms. Nystrom, you have 1 minute.
So we've seen this mounting debt over the last couple years, and it's becoming completely unmanageable. You know, when I served on the city council, we made sure to balance out our budgets every single year. What I think is really important is we got more into debt after passing, under Trump's plan, corporate tax breaks for the top 1%. I don't believe that we should be living in a country where large corporations like Eli Lilly pay $0 in federal taxes, or for instance, a president who is a multimillionaire to only pay $750 in income taxes. I know I pay more than that a year, and I'm sure that most people watching this also pay more than that a year. So we need a fair and equitable tax system. We also need to make sure that the middle class is not carrying the burden for all the rest of the people in this country.
Thank you. Mr. Stauber?
Yeah, you know, the debt deficit is, both parties are responsible for the debt deficit, and we need to make sure that we give this nation to our kids and grandchildren debt-free. And one of the things that we can look at is looking at balancing our budget. We ask Minnesota families to balance their budget, to live within their means, and to prioritize the taxpayers' money. That's exactly what I'm trying to do in Washington. We're working across the aisle with the Problem Solvers Caucus, looking at trying to maximize the hard-working men and women who pay their taxes. And my goal is to make sure that we work in a bipartisan fashion to make sure that we can decrease the debt and deficit so that our kids and grandkids are not saddled with this tremendous amount of debt.
Well, sticking with the economy here, the next question, the Trump administration put tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. The president says the tariffs help even the playing field for U.S. producers. Opponents, however, say countries like China will retaliate with new tariffs of their own and that those increased costs will ultimately be paid by the American people. Are you in favor of or opposed to increased tariffs, and why? Mr. Stauber, you have 1 minute.
Well, let's be clear. The steel tariffs that this administration put forward, it saved the Iron Range. The communist country of China, their #1 goal has been to take down this country, both militarily and economically. The communist country of China was steel dumping, cheap Chinese steel on the shores of this nation. And their sole purpose was to put the Iron Range out of business for good. And this president made the decision to put forth these steel tariffs that saved the Iron Range. The bottom line is steel making is a critical national security, strategic interest for us. We need steel making. And the iron mines of northeastern Minnesota and the Iron Range, they produce 85% of the steel made in this country is because of the iron ore mined in the Iron Range. It's critically important that we protect the mining and the jobs that built this region.
Ms. Nystrom?
So we absolutely need to be tough on China. I think that's been made very clear over our past decades here as a country. That is important that we do, and I think certainly the tariffs were a great first step at making sure that we can have better protections. We need to make sure that we're not just protecting large corporations, but we are protecting the workers in our great country. You know, I spoke with a farmer out of Pine County who said to me that what we need the most is a not erratic president. He said that he loaded up his semi-loader one night with goods, and the president tweeted something erratic overnight, stoking our trade wars. And by the next morning, his semi-loader plummeted in cost. And when we have farmers who are already losing massive profits the last couple of years, and especially with COVID, we need to make sure that we have stable leadership from the top down.
Thank you both. As part of our debate, we wanted to hear from some of our viewers about the issues that matter most to them. So Eric Holmstrom is president and CEO of the Laurentian Chamber of Commerce. He has a question about the current challenges facing the mining industry on Minnesota's Iron Range.
Last year, Representative McCollum introduced a bill that would halt the federal review of plans for any new mines or expansion of existing mines in the Rainy River watershed during fiscal year 2021. This would stop any permitting for the proposed Twin Metals mine and could prevent expansion of Virginia's Minorca, Mountain Iron's Mintac, and Babbitt's North Shore Taconite mine. A proposal like this directly impacts the livelihood of people on the Iron Range and in the ports from which the ore is shipped. It'll impact all of us in northeastern Minnesota. I have two questions. Do you pledge to oppose any blanket attempt to prevent the review of mine permitting in the Rainy River watershed? And what do you see as the future job base on the Iron Range?
And we'll start with Ms. Nystrom for an answer.
So to answer his first question, I have said and I will continue to say that I oppose any blanket ban. I think just like when I served on the city council, I looked at every single individual project that came in front of me. I think that's how we have to govern. I think doing a blanket ban goes way too far. I'm not against copper nickel mining, but we have to make sure that we can do it in an environmentally safe way that doesn't endanger our clean water. To his second question, I think, listening to the port director here in Duluth, I think our economy has to do with diversifying economic opportunities. We absolutely need to support the taconite mines, and we also need to make sure that we're expanding rural broadband. So if people want to start up a small business or farmers want to sell online, that people are getting those varied opportunities. We also know there's great hope and great promise with clean renewable energies, and we've seen great success with that here at the local port right here in Duluth.
Thank you. Mr. Stauber.
Well, it's interesting. My opponent has been endorsed by the DFL Environmental Caucus because she can't support polymet or twin metals. That's a fact. That's not from me. That's from the DFL Environmental Caucus. The bottom line is iron mining is the heartbeat of our region. So many economic developments happen because of mining. Mining is our past, our present, and our future. The Iron Range produces, like I say, 85% of the iron ore made to make steel in this country. They're good paying union jobs. And we have the opportunity to expand into copper nickel mining. We have the best environmental standards and the best labor standards, and we can do it in this country, and we can do it well. There's nobody that mines better than we do. In fact, my opponent is endorsed by Betty McCollum, who states, in her own words, her number one priority is to ban mining, and that's unconscionable, and I'm not going to let it happen.
Another question. When President Trump took office, he ended the U.S. involvement in the Paris Accord, which took a global approach to addressing the impacts of climate change. Do you believe Congress has a role in addressing climate change? And if so, what should Congress do? Mr. Stauber, we're going to start with you.
Well, we know that the climate is changing, and it's been changing for a lot of years. And it's important to work in a bipartisan fashion, and that's what I'm doing in Washington. I've co-sponsored the Carbon Capture Modernization Act, which decreases the emission of carbon. I sponsored the Trillion Tree Act, a natural way to sequester carbon. If we plant 1 trillion trees by 2050, we can reduce our carbon emissions that would be prior to the Industrial Revolution. We are leading the world in carbon reduction. And Darren, you bring up the Paris Climate Accord. There is not one nation in the Paris Climate Accord that have met their obligations. And in fact, the Paris Climate Accord was agreed upon in 2015. The countries of China and India don't have to follow any part of that regulation until 2030. That is not right, and that's not fair to the American worker.
Ms. Nystrom?
It's critical that we elect people to Congress and all different levels of government who can clearly say that climate change is an existential threat. We are falling farther and farther behind at the ways that we are combating this. President Trump has done an awful job at combating climate change. One of those prime examples is, I guess, my opponent who agrees with the president about the pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. We should never have done that. We need to be looked at as a world leader once again. We need to be looked at as we are taking all threats, regardless of what they are, but especially here with climate change, seriously. That we are doing what we can to weatherize buildings. We're doing what we can as individuals and businesses to help combat this. Because more than anything, I want to raise, along with my husband, my 2 stepdaughters, in a world that is going to exist generation after generation.
Thank you. Turning now to a viewer question on health care. Next month, the U.S. Supreme Court will be taking up a case challenging the Affordable Care Act. If you are elected, what will you do to make sure people with pre-existing conditions don't lose their health insurance? Ms. Nystrom, you have been an advocate for health care accessibility and lower prescription drug prices.
So the first thing that we have to do is protect people with pre-existing conditions. That's why I decided to run for Congress. I was never going to run for Congress, but I met with Congressman Stauber, and I specifically asked him if he would keep his campaign promise of protecting people with pre-existing conditions. He looked me in the eyes and he said yes, he would. But unfortunately, he lied to me. He voted against the protections with people with pre-existing conditions. He voted 5 different times not to lower the cost of prescription drugs. And as somebody who knows it firsthand, because I've lived with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years, we can't afford to go back to the time that I remember when health insurance companies would send me letters denying me health insurance. It's unconscionable that anybody is considering this, along with the Trump administration, along with looking at the Supreme Court, and if they could overturn that, that would be an absolute disaster in this country. And we need to do what we can to elect people who understand what is at stake here. And people are just one paycheck away from going bankrupt because they can't afford their health care costs.
That's time. Mr. Stauber?
Well, I certainly understand pre-existing conditions. My wife and I have a special needs child who has 2 pre-existing conditions. And it's really sad that my opponent decides to introduce herself to the constituents in this district by mischaracterizing my record and, in some cases, outright lying. I have supported pre-existing conditions. In fact, I've supported 2 pieces of legislation that will protect pre-existing conditions regardless of any outcome of any court case. It's just unconscionable. The bottom line is I believe that pre-existing conditions and surprise medical billing have to be stopped, and we can do that. You know, healthcare is about the choice and control that you want, the affordability that you need, the quality that you deserve from the medical professionals that you trust.
Thank you both. The Twin Ports area has really some of the oldest housing stock in the entire nation. Mr. Stauber, a question for you here. What do you think Congress should do to make more affordable housing available to more people in this particular district specifically?
Yeah, I can go back not only working in Congress to make housing more affordable. I can say that's exactly what I did on the St. Louis County Board with the Steve O'Neill apartments, the apartments that are going in at Lower Piedmont Avenue and West Michigan Street. These are affordable, quality housing, and we know that when we can allow people to have food on their table and a good quality home, they can succeed in life. That gives them the step up. And I have been a champion not only on the St. Louis County Board, but I've been a champion in Congress to make sure that the investments we make throughout the nation in regards to affordable housing are fair and equitable across the board. And Minnesota certainly needs and deserves the taxpayer investment right here in our great state.
Ms. Nystrom?
Affordable housing, is linked directly to, do we have a thriving economy? When I served on the Baxter City Council, we looked at very creative things that we could do to be able to offer more affordable housing. We looked at doing partnerships as a local government with local nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity. There were going to be a couple homes that were going to be destroyed because of road work that we were doing. And we worked with Habitat so we could relocate those homes, help build those homes the permanent ground to be able to give to people who are in desperate need for more affordable housing. We know this is a problem all across our district. We know affordable housing and access to child care is also an issue. It's a triangular effect with making sure that our economy can continue to thrive and grow and that all people have access to those things.
Our next topic focuses on the racial protests that followed the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Many people say America continues to struggle with racism. Do you believe that's true? And what steps should we take to address these concerns? We begin with Ms. Nystrom. You have 1 minute to respond.
Racism is alive in this country. I don't think that we can say no to that by any means. I just saw on the news today another unarmed man was shot innocently in the streets of D.C. We have to do stuff to make sure that this never happens again, right? That we can prevent this. I had a great working relationship when I served on the Baxter City Council with our police. I have family members that have been a sheriff and have served in our local law enforcement. I believe that you can respect law enforcement officers and also say that we need to put legislation forward that is going to be effective at combating these tragic events like we saw with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And I look to the NAACP, who has said, that my opponent's bill that he's proposed in the House for police reform is virtually devoid of leading to any greater police accountability. We need to put legislation up that is going to lead to greater accountability.
Mr. Stauber, you have 1 minute to respond.
I would just encourage my opponent to read the bill fully. As a 23-year police officer, 22 here in the city of Duluth, I understand the needs and I understand the importance of policing, the importance of the investment in policing. The bottom line is there is racism. I've seen it in the streets of Duluth. I've been called names just because I wore the uniform. And out in public across this great state, the men and women are being called racist names just because they wear a uniform. Now, the tragedy in Minneapolis involving George Floyd, it was a tragedy. But it didn't have to turn into rioting and looting and damaging, and in some cases, violence. The bottom line is working together, and that's what I'm doing with the Justice Act, working with the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus and others to bring a bill to the American law enforcement that works and is acceptable.
Thank you. And we're actually going to stick with that theme here a little bit, too, because both of you in the past have said that you do not support defunding the police. Mr. Stauber, as you've mentioned, you're a retired police officer yourself. What, if any, law enforcement reforms, then, do you want to see to improve policing, especially in minority communities?
Right. As a 23-year police officer, there's many things that I've put in the Justice Act that, quite frankly, should have been put in a long time ago. There's transparency, accountable measures, and performance measures. One of the things we talk about is body cameras. The city of Duluth was one of the leading agencies in the nation to first start with body cameras. And the bottom line is body cameras help they help exonerate, they help identify, and they help with training purposes. And the Justice Act allows 500,000 more body cams out and about in our law enforcement community that will help. The things that people don't understand, it's not the price of the body cam, it's the data storage that costs. And there's duty to intervene. There's hiring practices that should reflect the makeup of your community. There's background checks and psychological testing that an officer needs to go through in order to serve their community for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
So you're correct. I do not support defunding the police. I think, again, we need to look at putting legislation forward that leads to greater police accountability to make sure that these things don't continue to happen. Sure, having body cameras is a good step, making sure that more officers wear them, good step. But we also saw with the tragedy with George Floyd, people were wearing body cameras. We need to make sure, I'm in support of, right, banning no-knock warrants, banning chokeholds, looking to put more funding in restorative justice initiatives. These are the things where I have talked to people of color in our communities and organizations who have said this will lead to greater police accountability. I don't believe that I'm the expert on this topic as a white Swedish female. I've always had a great working relationship with the police department. We need to talk to the people who have been most affected. We need to talk to the families of the people affected. And we need to bring in all community partners around the table to make sure that we can problem solve.
Thank you. And we are going to take a quick break now. But first, we want to remind you about the importance of having your voice heard in the November 3rd election. To find out how you can vote early or in person on Election Day, where your polling place is, or what's on the ballot, go to WDIO.com/vote2020. More from the Your Voice, Your Vote Congressional Debate when we return.
Watching Your Voice, Your Vote. Minnesota's 8th Congressional District Debate. Presented by WDIO.
And welcome back to our debate between Congressman Pete Stauber and Democratic challenger Quinn Nystrom.
We are now at the halfway point in our discussion on issues that will directly impact viewers right here in northern Minnesota. So let's jump back in. Some families say going to college is no longer affordable. Studies show that, adjusted for inflation, the cost of attending a college or university has jumped more than 25% over the last decade, leaving many students burdened with student loans when they graduate. The next question comes from Laura Schwant, a college student who hopes to teach here in Minnesota after she graduates.
As a student studying to become an elementary teacher, my main worry is the financial situation I'll be in when I graduate. So right now I'm taking out thousands of dollars worth of loans. And when I graduate, I'm expecting a low salary starting off with this career. So I guess my question would be, what will you do to make college more affordable for students studying to become teachers? And how are you going to help increase wages for teachers?
Let's start with Ms. Nystrom.
So we absolutely need to first and foremost pay teachers a better wage. I was proud to be endorsed by the National Teachers Union. The truth is, I was a college student and I was riddled with tens of thousands of dollars of college debt. It is a struggle and it is hard, especially when some of those reasons then determine what career path you go into or what career path you don't go into. Teachers are the backbone of our community. And so I think first and foremost, we need to pay them a good wage. Second, this whole talk about, just being riddled with debt, I'm very much in favor of programs that we've had about a 10-year loan forgiveness with people who go into teaching or other public service positions. I'm a great supporter of that, of where you can work hard in the areas that we need in this country to get your loans paid off or lowered. And so I hope that you go and graduate and become a public school teacher to serve our communities.
Thank you. That's time. Mr. Stauber.
Thank you, Laura, for the question, and thanks for going in the teaching profession. We need great people going into the teaching profession. You're teaching and educating that next generation of leaders in this country. I'm proud to have an A rating with the National Education Association. In Congress, I've supported education initiatives. And to your point, we not only have to look at four-year degrees, which you're in, we have to look at alternatives. There's two-year vocational apprenticeship programs. We've forgotten about that. There's a path for four-year students, and they're going to excel, and there's also that other path of two-year vocational or registered apprenticeship programs that we need. We're short on those skills that work with our hands, our laborers, our union members. Those are good paying jobs, and we can't forget that. And I think, Laura, as we go forward, we also have an obligation.
Time. We can continue that in the next question, in fact, because this is a time when many people are working from home and schools are teaching online. Some rural areas, however, don't have access to high-speed internet as part of all this process. So what would you do as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives to provide greater access to this technology? Mr. Stauber, we'll start with you. You can continue your thought from the previous question if you prefer.
The high-speed, reliable broadband is so important, especially in rural America. We need to make sure that our hospitals stay competitive, especially with telehealth, telemedicine coming on board. We need to make sure that our students stay competitive, having access to high-speed, reliable internet. Rural America, rural Minnesota matters. I've been supporting of every initiative involving broadband. We know that people are going to move to greater Minnesota with not only themselves, but with their businesses to live our way of life, to live the good life up here, and bring their businesses. It's an economic development. We have to make sure that every house has broadband. Neil Kashkari from the Federal Reserve said at some point in this nation's history, every mailbox mattered. We have to make sure that every home matters for broadband.
My opponent says that he's supported every initiative that would help to expand rural broadband in our communities. But he voted against FY19 and FY20 agriculture appropriations that would have directly funded the rural utility services. You know, our farmers are in great need to have access online so that they can sell their products. Our students, we see there's 3, 4 kids in a home with 2 working parents from home. A hotspot that the school loans them just doesn't cut it. We need to fund a large-scale infrastructure package as soon as possible, not only to improve roads and bridges, but also to make sure that we don't have communities like we do right now in this district, where we have counties like Pine and Mille Lacs that have less than 45% of the homes that have access to rural broadband internet. It would be a primary focus of mine once elected to Congress.
And there's concern that young people are leaving northern Minnesota to seek employment elsewhere, so-called brain drain. The next question comes from another of our local viewers. They ask, how can the federal government work with local communities and businesses to ensure good paying jobs here in the Northland? For this question, we'll start with Ms. Nystrom.
So it's really important that we work on a collaborative front to make sure that we have good paying jobs, that young people feel like they can get a good paying job and live back in their community like I do in my hometown of Baxter. I know that the Initiative Foundation of Little Falls has done a great program with their Initiator Fellowship. I was one of those. They wanted to invest in young people who wanted to have social entrepreneur things in our communities. Programs like that are important. Programs that look at diversifying economic opportunities, ensuring that we have good livable wages. To me, that means increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And we need to make sure that we're doing a good job by working with our local high schools, even our junior highs, working alongside our community college and letting students know all the different options they have with technical schools, 2-year schools, great apprenticeships offered by our unions, and a 4-year degree if that best serves them.
Mr. Stauber.
Well, I think I would submit to my opponent, mining and miners make good money. Mm-hmm. Iron mining is the heartbeat of this region, and we're on the cusp of not only copper nickel mining, but Enbridge Line 3. You and your supporters are not allowing that to happen. The bottom line is jobs in the economy spur economic development in so many areas. And it's important that we invest in those jobs and the part of the economy that built our region. These blue-collar, middle-class jobs are so important. And the fact of the matter is, as we build the economy, when you build the economy, a rising tide lifts all boats. Everybody benefits from an economy that was churning, just like it was 8 months ago before the pandemic came to our shores through no fault of our own.
Our next question regarding a little bit about money and how it affects us all. President Trump and Congress, of course, even today, in fact, are still going back and forth on another COVID-19 stimulus bill. Many people and businesses need this financial help right now, still. And so here's a 3-point question here for you we've put together. Number 1, do you believe there should be another stimulus bill? How large of a package should it be? And what needs to be included in it? Mr. Stauber, you have 1 minute to address this as best you can.
Thank you. You know, I was very proud to work in a bipartisan fashion in Congress to get the CARES funding and the PPP packages out to the American people and the small businesses. The PPP loans saved 51 million jobs across this nation, and 11.4 million small businesses were allowed to keep their doors open because of the investment, that bipartisan investment. To your first point, we still have billions of dollars in the initial care package that we have to invest into our nation to make sure that our small businesses, which are the engine of our economy, survive. And there is targeted investment. I've supported a bipartisan effort in Congress to put forth a targeted investment for our small businesses, for our communities, for our cities and county governments, because they're shouldering a lot of the intense scrutiny because of the pandemic, and I'm looking forward to working on both sides of the aisle as we get through this Congress.
We absolutely need another stimulus bill passed. I've talked to local restaurant owners. I've talked to local dry cleaners in my downtown area. Their funding that they got on the first pass has run out. And now they don't know what to do. And especially with what we have seen here with COVID cases on the rise right here in Minnesota, right here in northeastern Minnesota. So we absolutely need another stimulus bill passed by the end of this year, because it's about people, not politics. It's not about partisan politics. It's about protecting every single member of our community. I think what needs to be included in that bill is similar stuff that we saw with the HEROES Act, with agriculture funding. I've talked to so many farmers who've been so hard hit. They need relief, and they need that relief now. We also, I believe, need to put in more funding for more PPEs. I talked to nurses today where, again, they don't have access to their PPEs, even if people have donated to their hospital.
That's time. I have to cut you off there. With near record high water levels continuing to cause shoreline damage and erosion around Lake Superior and the other Great Lakes, should Congress provide more funding to move homes and other infrastructure farther away from the shore? Ms. Nystrom.
So I believe that we need a smart strategy with this, right? We've seen that so much is changing in our communities. We've seen that with climate change firsthand. I think we have to work together on a federal, state, and a local level to make sure that we are doing proper planning, that we are making sure that people are not in harm's way with the water coming closer to shore and closer to shore. We don't want anybody's houses underwater. And so I think, again, as community partners, as government partners, we work together to put the best plan together to make sure that nobody's in danger, and we are making smart decisions, fiscally smart decisions as well, how we move forward with this, because it's clearly not going to go anywhere.
Mr. Stauber.
Yeah, I was very proud to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to increase funding for the Great Lakes Restorative Initiative that puts forth efforts around the Great Lakes. This is a caucus led by my good friend Marcy Kaptur from Ohio, and what we did is we actually were able to get $174 million into the Great Lakes Restorative Initiative to study issues, just as you brought up, Bailey, on homes that are closer to the shoreline, stopping aquatic invasive species coming into the Great Lakes, to make sure we can clean up our sediment right here on the Duluth Harbor and the St. Louis River estuary. I am very proud of the efforts that I've put forward. We need to work with our environmental groups, the EPA, that we have a great lab right here in the city of Duluth. My wife used to work there. It's important that we keep our water clean, and we're leading the charge. The Great Lakes Restorative Initiative and the experts working with them are leading the charge in clean water throughout the Great Lakes region, which is a big part of our economy.
We have another environmental related question here next for you two. The Trump administration says that it does plan to strip protections for gray wolves. Do you support the move? Mr. Stauber.
Colin Peterson and I are co-authored a bill to remove the gray wolf from the Endangered Species Act. The Obama administration was right in 2013 when they removed the gray wolf from the Endangered Species Act. There was a judge in D.C. that decided otherwise and put the gray wolf back on the endangered list. When I talk to farmers and ranchers across the district, and the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association, of which I am a deer hunter myself, and so is my family, they're devastated when their livestock is killed by a gray wolf. It's thousands and thousands of dollars that our farmers and ranchers are experiencing because of the gray wolf. I'm working on a task force in a bipartisan way, and Colin Peterson, my Democratic colleague in District 7, is working on it. We've got the vast majority of the northern members of Congress on board, and the gray wolf was never intended to be kept permanently on the endangered species list, and there are stats that say that gray wolf has re-engineered and the numbers are up.
Ms. Nystrom?
I think this is all about, striking the correct balance. It's about, decisions maybe that have been made in the past, they've been reversed. I think this is about looking to the experts, talking to people in our communities, if that's farmers, if that's hunters. We have the International Wolf Center right here in the 8th Congressional District in Ely. I think it's about, again, respecting animals, but also making sure that they are not causing irreparable harm to our farmers, to other people. So we have to strike that right balance, and I think how we do that is by continuing to listen, to create roundtables and forums, and make sure that we are coming to the right decision for all parties.
All of us taxpayers, of course, contribute to Social Security, but there is concern about the long-term financial outlook for this and other safety net programs. This question comes from a viewer who asks, how will you fight to protect those benefits in Congress? Ms. Nystrom.
I will fight to protect your Social Security once elected to Congress. You know, my grandparents, they're 90, 95 years old respectively. They depend on that every single month. You know, what President Trump has done with talking about pulling back some of these paycheck taxes. You know, my husband, who works for the federal government, he has been affected by that. They're not allowed to opt in or opt out. That funding is directly put to Social Security and making sure it is funded. We cannot elect people to Congress or the presidency who will not protect Social Security to protect our great seniors of this 8th district. You know, we have the oldest age by median age of any congressional district. And so I hear about this topic very often. We need to stand and work on a bipartisan basis to make sure that nothing jeopardizes Social Security and Medicare.
Mr. Stauber, your response.
I want to be very clear. I will preserve, protect, and defend and strengthen Medicare and Social Security. There's no question about it. I've done that in Congress, working across the aisle. What we can't have, though, is this Medicare for all. It will destroy Medicare and Social Security. I've got co-authored legislation to get rid of the windfall elimination for Social Security so that spouses get the amount of Social Security that they were promised by this government. And I'm committed to do that. I see people in the state of Minnesota that have public employee retirement pensions that don't get their spouses the appropriate amount of their pension after their spouses passes away. That's unconscionable, and that's what I'm working to change. These promises made, promises kept, and I want to be clear. I will preserve, protect, and defend and strengthen Medicare and Social Security for our seniors. They deserve that.
Well, it seems like we're just kind of getting warmed up, but we're down to our final question of the night. And it focuses on the tone of politics in Washington these days. Now, you both have said that you are committed to working in a spirit of bipartisanship on many issues. How specifically, give us some specifics, how do you specifically plan to reach across the aisle to work on bills with members of the opposite party? Mr. Stauber.
Darren, my record speaks for itself. One of the first pieces of legislation that got into law, I was a part of, and that was a bipartisan effort. I am one of only 50 members in the Problem Solvers Caucus in the United States Congress. That's 25 Republicans and 25 Democrats. And the philosophy with the Problem Solvers, it's the Herb Brooks philosophy, the greatest hockey coach ever. He said the name on the front of the jersey means more than the name on the back. If we all went to Congress and it said USA on the front of our jersey and it didn't have a number or a name or a political party on the back, we could move mountains. And that's what I'm doing in Congress. You know, when I ran for this seat 2 years ago, I said I'm not only going to reach across the aisle and work with my colleagues, I'm going to get up, walk over, and build relations. And that's exactly what I've done. My record speaks for itself. Every single piece of legislation that I have sponsored has been co-authored or co-sponsored by one of my colleagues on the Democratic side.
What my opponent's record speaks for is voting over 90% of the time with the Republican Party. To me, that is not working across the aisle on bipartisan solutions. You know, we're about 50-50 in this district. All people should be represented. You know, when I served on the city council, somebody came to me with an issue. I didn't say, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? And then I decided if I would help them. You know, I also will say, I have worked on a bipartisan basis here in Minnesota with a split legislature and have helped to get legislation passed into law. That was with the Alex Smith Emergency Insulin Act. That also was with a step therapy legislation that says health insurance agencies cannot dictate the medications that you're on. Doctors need to do that. Also, take one look at my social media, and though I differ with my opponent on issues, I never have once painted a broad brush about conservatives or Republicans. And I would say that he has, on many occasions, painted a very broad negative brush
That's
about
time.
Democrats.
Thank you. We want to now give each candidate 1 minute for a closing statement. We do begin with you, Ms. Nystrom.
As I'm sure you saw here tonight at the debate, my opponent and I have very stark differences. I got into this race because I have a belief that every person in this country should not live with concern about if they can pick up a prescription drug on a Friday or if their health insurance is going to be repealed because no fault of their own, they have a pre-existing condition. I will repeatedly say it, what my opponent's record is. He says that I've lied about it, but you can go on our social media right now. We will list the bills. He voted 5 times not to lower the cost of prescription drugs. He voted against protecting people with pre-existing conditions. I'm not lying about that. I would not have run for Congress if he would have kept his promises. And so I will promise you here today, I will keep my promises. I will work for everybody of this district. I will represent people and not corporate donors. That is my promise, and I so hope that I will earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nystrom. Mr. Stauber, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Thank you very much, and there are stark differences, there's no doubt about it. You know, 2 years ago, I made a promise that if you sent me to Washington, I would be an independent voice. I wasn't going with a red playbook or a blue playbook. I'm going there to work on behalf of all of us. I'm going to keep fighting for the economic drivers and the economic engine right here in the 8th Congressional District. These are the same economic drivers, mining, manufacturing, timber harvesting, that built this region and are going to continue to reignite that blue-collar boom that we had just 8 months ago. And I'm going to keep fighting so every Minnesotan can afford their prescription drugs. As a 23-year police officer, I will always stand with law enforcement. I will have their backs. These are the men and women that keep our communities and our families safe. And to everyone watching at home, I want you to know this. You are my priority. I'm Pete Stauber, and I humbly ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. That concludes tonight's debate. It did go by quite quickly, and we do want to thank you both, Mr. Stauber and Ms. Nystrom, for participating with us here tonight.
And we invite you to join us this Thursday night at 6 for our debate with the candidates running for Wisconsin's 7th Congressional District.
Right, and of course, WDIO will bring you complete coverage on election night. Just 15 days away, by the way. We'll have results, we'll have reaction, we'll have analysis, all starting at 5 o'clock on November 3rd.
And on behalf of the entire WDIO News team, have a good night.